Hi, welcome back to another episode. I'm Wendy, your host, and today I really want to talk deeply about a topic that I find is so helpful in guiding you in the path of actually whatever you do. Obviously this podcast is about stripping, and I found it really, really useful in my journey in the stripping arena. So that is being really connected to your why. Like, why are you really doing this? It's so important, and there's a lot of juice and there's a lot of energy that's like released when we really tap into our why. And it really helps as well with motivation and staying on path. And I've found with this topic, there's kind of two sides to it. Well, I found anyway in my journey. There's one part I found that really drove me in a direction that it saw a lot of success, but because it was half of the story, there was always something missing. And so what I mean by that is we can be driven by, what we know we don't want and trying to get away from what we don't want. And often in life, we can be aware of what we don't want, but we might not really know what we do want. And so that in itself, that's the other part. It's quite a journey to really connect in with yourself and discover, what is it that I really want? I found in the majority, and definitely the first portion of my stripping career, I was really heavily driven by what I don't want. I was driven by my fears, and they were exceedingly strong, and there's no regrets there. There's nothing wrong with either side. It's just so powerful to discover what both parts are. And so the second, so not even the second, but the later part of my stripping journey, it really became more intentional around what is this for? What am I doing this for? Who do I want to be? And what do I want to achieve from this whole experience? And it really helped to steer me in sort of a more healthy direction, I guess you could say. So I'm just going to talk a little bit today about my personal experience and what those two parts looked like. Maybe it can help you to relate or start questioning, what is this about? See if you can find value in that for yourself. So I need to rewind right back, because knowing what I don't want really goes back to my upbringing and my childhood. And then there was sort of like a pinnacle point that, opened my eyes, sort of like lifted the veil, I guess you could say, and made me really start questioning, hang on, what do I want now? So it sort of played out a bit like this. Basically, growing up, I grew up in a pretty dysfunctional household. I lived in a very small house. There was a lot of violence. I didn't feel safe. Pretty much all of the time, I would either be hiding or scared or whatever. And I didn't have my own space. I had to sleep in my mum's bed until I was 11, which was, pretty uncomfortable. Just always knowing and feeling that I don't have space here. That was a really big narrative. And also obviously not feeling safe a lot of the time. So from that experience, fast forwarding, also when I was about 7, my dad left and lived in Switzerland, and he'd come back about once a year. But majority of the time he was in Switzerland. And so that also disrupted the family dynamic, and it gave me a really big sense of like an abandonment issue, because it wasn't also just a one-time thing. It was every year. And there was always constant, never knowing when he's coming back, never knowing how long he's going for, always having to say goodbye, always having to re-meet him kind of thing. And it was really disruptive as well. So there developed a really big abandonment wound as well, which also had me craving stability a lot. And it also had me develop a really difficult sense of self and self-worth and all of that kind of thing, because, you know, tied into that with child logic, you know, I could, you know, well, I did add this story in that, you know, I'm not lovable enough to be around, and so it's not enough to keep him here, and he always has to leave. Coupled in with a lot of dysfunction and violence from my dad when he was around, infiltrated into my brothers, and then kind of perpetuated from there. My mum was kind of absent. She didn't know how to deal with the situation as well. So, yeah, it was kind of all up in the air. It didn't feel safe. Then when I turned around 18, just before 18, I finished high school, and instead of going to schoolies, I went to Switzerland for the first time to visit my dad and to visit my new little brother, who was a little baby then, and my stepmom, who's amazing. And that was a great trip. However, what happened was when I returned to Australia, I was about to start uni. I got into uni. I was doing a Bachelor of Science. And when I got back, my mum had moved to the country, and I found that all of my stuff was in storage, which, you know, I was of an age where it's not that unusual to move out, but because I didn't see it coming and I wasn't expecting to come back and have all of this new stuff going on, having nowhere to live and about to start uni and no money, I had to go to Centrelink and, you know, try and get payments there. There was a lot of difficulty actually signing up, and I didn't get paid for about 3 months. So there was this patch when I first moved out where I had nowhere to live. I ended up finding a place, and Mum did help me, you know, get the stuff out of storage and into my new house. I didn't really know how to live in a share house. And I had $2,000 notes from my dad when I returned from Switzerland. So Switzerland has $1,000 notes, which is pretty cool. And I had 2 of those. So I paid my rent in advance for a period, thinking that Centrelink wouldn't take too long. It started dragging out. I started getting really low on money. And I remember a real crunch point where I had $600 left. I had rent still coming up, you know, I'd paid a period, but it wasn't enough. I had to be able to eat, you know, I had to be able to go to uni, all of that kind of thing. And I started realizing this isn't going to last. I don't know when I'm going to be paid. So I made the decision with that $600. I bought a set of scales and an ounce of weed, and I started selling weed and I started hustling. And that was a real sort of significant moment in my life, I guess, because the level of fear and uncertainty was so huge. Plus, I had always been living in survival up until that point growing up. I don't remember a time that I felt I could ever relax, and this just sort of exacerbated it. Not only that, returning back from Switzerland and having my mum leave unexpectedly, that kind of triggered the abandonment wound. So it was a lot at one time. And all I could think to do is just fucking hustle and make it work. So that's what I did. And yeah, it was a lot. So fast forwarding from there, you know, I did that for a while. I ended up getting some waitressing jobs, just like regular waitressing, not in our industry. I also started dating really abusive people because my sense of self-worth was so low. I was really in a dark period of my life. Somehow I still managed to pass uni. And that was difficult, but, you know, that I had my priorities at least in order enough to maintain that. But the abusive relationships, the instability, it was huge. I remember I moved 16 times in 4 years. And yeah, just feeling really destabilized for a really long time. Eventually I finished uni, and I got a job in a pathology laboratory, and so I had a salary, but I started on $17 an hour. So even though I'd finished my degree, the role was $16 an hour, and they gave me $1 extra per hour to acknowledge my uni degree. So it was low pay, and from there I was living week to week. I was working full time. I remember a moment where I had about $20 to my name, and I was like, I'm never gonna fucking let $20 mean this much to me ever again, because it meant whether or not I could eat for that week. And again, I just found myself still in survival mode. As I've mentioned already before, I always had a real interest in the stripping industry, but I had no confidence, and I was very low in self-esteem, really struggling. And despite that, I, gave it a go, and I loved it instantly. And so in order to do what I love, which is stripping, I worked all week, and then I worked on the weekends as well. So I could do stripping, and I was too scared to quit my day job. So that saw me working 40 hours a week, working on the weekends, and just doing that for years and years until I finally bit the bullet and quit my science job. And from that, the reason, I know I've talked about this before, but the reason I want to talk about it with this is the level of fear and the level of uncertainty and the amount that I'd pushed myself already to that point. It didn't really bother me working 6 nights a week, because our club was open 6 nights a week. I'd always work 6 nights a week. And on the night off, I remember I used to dip into real sort of panic, because I felt like I'm not making money, like my self-worth would just really drop without the external circumstances of in a strip club where I'm making quick cash and getting lots of compliments and, filling that void of feeling really, down on myself. So very quickly it would drop. So I found myself working all of the time. A lot of people that worked with me were like, how do you do it? You're constantly working. And to me, it just felt like nothing. It felt completely normal. I remember years into my stripping career, one night I was working and someone mentioned, and I was working in Perth, if you don't already know. And I remember one night someone mentioning a club in Melbourne that's open till 10 a.m. Our club always shut at 5 a.m. on the weekends and about 1:30 a.m. on the weekdays. So I heard about this club being open till 10 a.m. On the weekends, even later sometimes, and usually around 6 or 7 a.m. on the weekdays. And I was like, that is me. I have the energy. I was fully running from adrenaline. And so I booked a ticket and I went for a month, and I went and I worked for a whole month. I took one night off in the month, and I got completely burnt out. So this is what I'm talking about. This was sort of the pinnacle of all of this drive and fear and living in survival mode and just pushing myself and not being in touch with, like, what am I doing it all for? Like, what am I actually doing this for? And so I worked this entire month. It was great. I made a fortune. And then I decided, after that month, I felt really disconnected from myself. I felt so burnt out and exhausted. The following month, I went and I did my yoga teacher training in Bali. And that was a month in Bali, meditating, learning the yogic traditions, doing yoga every day, all day long, beautiful food, beautiful company. And it just was like a complete 180. And that is the first time in my life that I felt space enough and connected to myself enough that I thought, like, what am I doing? Like, what do I really want? What is important to me? Who do I want to become? What is all of this running and all of this effort for? And so that sparked then a massive unfolding of events. I'd been working on stripology leading up to that, but obviously never had the capacity to be able to do much with it because I was working so much and I was so burnt out all the time, but I didn't really realize it. But I had already put so much time and effort into creating my content and deeply thinking about, you know, what is it that helps to be in flow in the strip club, because I see it as a bit of a jigsaw puzzle where, you know, you lay the pieces down and you really can get in an amazing flow in the strip club, and it can become quite effortless comes to mind. There's still definitely a lot of effort, but it just flows, right, with much more ease. And so, yeah, that was in place, but I hadn't really believed in myself enough yet, or just given myself enough space to actually do something with it. So after that yoga teacher training, that's when I first started my Instagram and, you know, just put my thoughts out there and things like that. So anyway, that kind of sparked a real connection with myself and with what is important, you know, what lights me up and what is this all for. And I noticed that when I was doing my coaching and, you know, deeply thinking about, you know, how stripping affects me as a person, just all of the things that I talk about through stripology and how, you know, we can work more efficiently and all of that. I realized, you know, a huge piece of it is to broaden my capacity for myself and for other people, and not just in that fight and flight mode. So this other piece developed that was like really, really important to my journey that I hadn't even realized yet. And it was creating space for myself and just a slower pace, and a pace where, you know, my capacity for myself and others can expand. And with the intention of doing that for stripology, I also noticed in the strip club that made a massive difference with my quality of customers as well, because I was able to hold people more deeply in their experience. I started attracting much more, I guess, high caliber customers that really want that deep connection, and they really saw a lot of value in that. And they would come to me and, you know, I know we'll experience this, you know, tell us really deep things. And, you know, I'd never really experienced regulars before this point. It was more hustle, hustle, hustle. And then after, it really became more long-term customers with, you know, a more regular relationship going on there. And so it was really interesting to notice all of that unfold. And then just connecting into my why. So I knew by this point what I've been running from the whole time, you know, through a lot of deep inner work, really becoming aware of how I don't want things to be. And then in the flip side, really working on how do I want things to be? You know, how do I want my life to be? How do I want to show up? How does stripping support this? And that, for me, really felt like more of a complete experience. And so, yeah, I just really want to put this topic out today and, you know, a little bit of my own personal experience, and ask you the question, what is it all for? What is driving you? Are you connected to, you know, maybe if it's trying to get away from something or towards something? That's usually what drives us as people, and becoming really aware of what is it that I'm trying to distance myself from. And not only that, because we do get a lot of energy from that, you know, there's a lot of fuel there trying to get away from something. It's just survival. It's the way we're wired as humans. And then more importantly as well, what am I working towards? There's more of a pull there. There's more of leading from your heart in that way. It's more like a guiding star if you do feel like you're getting off track or wondering, yeah, the big questions like, what is this all for? Or why am I doing this? Or do I, you know, need some time off, or do I not need time off? And all of those things, just everyday decision making. Knowing what we're working towards and our why is like a guiding star, basically, and it can really help us realign and center ourselves and go, does this feel like this is supporting me on my path towards what I want to create? Because we can always run from what we don't want, and we might not end up there, but we don't really know where we're going to end up. And so we can marry the two together and have a more heart-centered direction and really harness the energy from both sides of the coin. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If it really resonated with you, please click the subscribe button. It helps to get this podcast out in front of the people who might be needing to hear it, and share on your socials. If you do want to do that, please remember to tag me so I get to see. And yeah, I hope you enjoy your journey.